Vivian Coyle set the plate down in front of the biker, with a hand steady enough that nobody watching would have guessed what she'd slipped beneath the napkin, folded at its edge. Most people who worked the counter at the Rusty Spur for as long as she had learned to keep their hands steady regardless of what was happening underneath them. She was 74 years old, and in 41 years of cooking at that roadhouse, she had never once done anything as dangerous as what she did at 6:15 that evening. She refilled his coffee, said nothing out of the ordinary, and walked back toward the kitchen without once looking at his face to see whether he'd found the note yet. It read, in handwriting made shaky by more than age, "Don't eat it. Leave now." Please, what the biker did in the next 4 minutes, and what happened at the Rusty Spur Roadhouse over the following hour, was not something Vivian, the diner's owner, or the man reading that note at table 6 ever expected when the evening began. The Rusty Spur sat 40 miles from the nearest town of any size. A truck-stop diner on a stretch of 2-lane highway in eastern Wyoming that had been losing customers steadily since the interstate rerouted 20 years back, leaving it to survive mostly on whoever still preferred the old road. A faded sign out front still advertised the pie case that had closed for good 6 years earlier. And the parking lot's gravel had gone soft with weeds along the edges nobody had gotten around to clearing in longer than that. Roman Steele had stopped there a little after 6, the only customer at that hour besides 2 truckers finishing up at the counter, riding alone on a supply run for his Chapter 3 states over, and in no particular hurry to reach the motel he'd booked 40 miles further on. He was 41, built lean rather than broad, a Hell's Angel for 16 years, his cut carrying a road captain's patch and a small enamel pin shaped like a set of dog tags below his collar, his younger brothers, killed in a training accident before either of them turned 25. A weight Roman had carried quietly for most of his adult life without ever finding much use in talking about it. He rode alone more often than not these days, a habit that had started as grief and had, over the years, settled into something closer to preference. The particular solitude of a man who had made peace with his own company a long time ago. He ordered the meatloaf off the menu, and the owner, a heavyset man named Dale Corwin who ran the place his father had built decades earlier, had leaned over the counter with the particular friendliness of a man selling something, and said he ought to try the special instead. Off-menu, made fresh, on the house for a rider who'd come this far out of his way. Roman had no particular reason to say no. He said yes the way most people say yes to a free meal from a friendly stranger, and Dale disappeared into the kitchen, looking, for a moment, more pleased with himself than the situation seemed to call for. Roman noticed the cook's hands when she set the plate down. Not shaking exactly, steadier than that. The specific, deliberate steadiness of someone concentrating hard on appearing calm. He noticed her eyes flick once toward the kitchen doorway before she walked away. And he noticed, lifting the napkin to wipe his mouth out of habit rather than need, the folded paper underneath it. Before we get to what Roman did next, if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit subscribe so this story doesn't get lost in the feed, and drop your city or state down in the comments below. I read every single one, and it means more than you'd guess to see how far a story like this can travel. Now, back to the Rusty Spur Roadhouse. Because whatever Vivian Coyle had risked everything to tell a stranger was about to matter a great deal more than either of them understood standing in that kitchen a minute earlier. Vivian had worked that kitchen for 41 years, since she was 33, back when Dale's father ran the place with an honesty Vivian still measured every day of his son's ownership against and found wanting. Old Mr. Corwin had taught her to make the biscuits the diner was still known for, back when the highway out front carried enough traffic that the Rusty Spur turned away customers on a busy Saturday morning. She had watched that traffic thin over 2 decades the way a person watches a river slowly changing course, and she had watched Dale, inheriting a business worth considerably less than his father had built it into. Grow first anxious, then bitter, then something considerably worse than either. She had raised a son of her own in the apartment above the diner's storage room, a boy named Danny who joined the Marines at 18, come home 4 years later with a motorcycle and a quiet he never fully explained, and died on a rain-slicked county road 3 years after that, in an accident that had nothing to do with anyone at the Rusty Spur, and everything to do with the specific, permanent hole it left in her life. Regardless, she still kept his room exactly as he'd left it, 12 years on. A fact she had never mentioned to anyone at the diner, and had no particular intention of starting to. She had noticed the pattern about 18 months back, slowly, the way a person notices something they have every reason not to want to see. A trucker who left owing money nobody ever chased. A rider found disoriented on the highway's shoulder 2 counties over, robbed of his wallet and his watch, with no memory of how he'd gotten there, and no interest, once found, in pursuing it further. The powder Dale kept in an unmarked tin at the back of the walk-in, added only to plates he called the special, offered only to travelers eating alone. On nights when the diner ran thin enough that nobody else would notice what happened after. She had told herself, for longer than she was proud of, that it was not her business. That a woman her age with nowhere else to work could not afford the kind of trouble that came from accusing her employer of something this serious without proof beyond her own suspicion. She had told herself that the men it happened to were rough enough, tough enough, that maybe they could absorb a stolen wallet better than most. She had not let herself think, until tonight, about what it would have meant for someone to slip Danny a note like this one. Years ago, before the road took him instead. Roman reminded her of her son in a way she could not have explained to anyone who asked. Something in the quiet way he'd thanked her for the coffee. Something in the pin on his collar that she recognized from Danny's own service, as grief worn deliberately rather than hidden. She had decided, watching Dale disappear into the kitchen with that particular pleased look on his face, that this was the night she stopped being able to live with what she'd been letting happen. Dale Corwin had inherited the Rusty Spur 8 years earlier, and had spent the last 3 of them watching the diner's honest revenue shrink toward nothing as the old highway lost what little traffic it had left. He had built the arrangement carefully, a sedative diluted enough to pass unnoticed in food, reserved for solo travelers whose absence would draw the least attention, robbed while unconscious, and left along the highway's shoulder to wake up confused, embarrassed, and disinclined to make a police report out of a night they mostly couldn't remember and half suspected was their own fault. He had chosen his targets with a specific, patient calculation of a man who had convinced himself the arithmetic justified the crime. Never more than 4 or 5 times a year. Always travelers passing through rather than regulars. Always cash and small valuables rather than anything that might trigger an insurance investigation. He had told himself, in the early months, that it was a temporary measure to keep the diner afloat until business improved. 3 years in, he no longer bothered pretending to himself that improvement was the plan. His son Cody, 26, worked the diner's back lot most evenings, ostensibly fixing cars, actually watching for the specific signal. Dale flipping the porch light off and back on. That meant a mark had gone down, and the lot was clear to work. Cody had been 23 when his father first explained the arrangement to him. Old enough to understand exactly what he was being asked to help with, and young enough, still, to convince himself that going along with it counted as something other than a choice. Dale had chosen Roman for exactly the reasons that made him, in Dale's calculation, an ideal target, alone, off the interstate, riding gear worth considerably more than the diner's entire weekly take, and a man whose eventual account of a bad night on the road would carry, Dale had learned from experience, almost no weight with anyone inclined to believe it. What Dale had not accounted for was a woman he had underestimated for 8 straight years, finally deciding that fear of losing her job mattered less than one more stranger's son riding off that lot unconscious and robbed. Roman did not eat the special. He cut it, moved it around his plate the way a man does when he wants to look occupied, and used the minutes that bought him to think through exactly what he'd been handed. He excused himself to the restroom, and once the door was shut, sent a single text to a brother 2 exits back who'd mentioned, hours earlier, having stopped for the night at a bar less than 15 miles up the same highway. Something's wrong at the Rusty Spur off 26. Might need you. Don't call. Come. He came back out, sat down, and kept moving food around a plate he had no intention of finishing, watching Dale's reflection in the diner's front window and waiting to see how long it would take the man to notice. It took 12 minutes. Dale noticed the untouched plate on his second pass by the table, and something in his easy friendliness thinned into a question he did not know how to ask without giving away what answer he was hoping for. Something wrong with the food? Not hungry after all, Roman said. Appreciate the thought, though. Dale's eyes went, for a fraction of a second, toward the kitchen doorway, toward Vivian standing frozen inside it, with a dish towel twisted tight in both hands, and something in his face rearranged itself from friendly to calculating in a way that made the whole diner feel considerably colder than the thermostat could account for. Vivian, Dale said, not looking away from Roman. Come out here a minute. She came, because 41 years of working for this family had taught her body to obey that particular tone before her mind finished deciding whether to resist it. Her hands were trembling now, openly, the steadiness she'd managed at 6:15 entirely spent. You say anything to him? Dale asked her. Quiet, dangerous, in the specific way of a man who had never once, in 3 years of this arrangement, needed to ask that question before. Dale, I don't know what you don't. His voice dropped further. Don't you dare stand there and lie to me in my own diner. Vivian's composure broke completely at that, 41 years of careful silence collapsing in a single breath. I know what's in that tin, she whispered. I've known for 18 months, Dale. I should have said something the first time. Roman stood up slowly from the booth, unhurried. The particular stillness of a man who had spent 16 years learning exactly how much weight a calm voice could carry in a room that was about to go wrong. Leave her alone, Roman said. Dale's head snapped toward him. This isn't your business. Made it mine when you tried to drug my dinner, Roman said. Want to explain that part first? Or should we skip to the part where your son comes in from the back lot to help you finish the job? Something in Dale's face went entirely still at that, the specific stillness of a man realizing, all at once, exactly how much had already been figured out. His hand shot out and closed around Vivian's wrist, hard, pulling her half a step toward him. She's the one who ruined this, Dale said, voice rising, no longer bothering with friendliness at all. 41 years, and this is what I get. You think anybody's going to believe an old woman and some biker over me? Let go of her, Roman said. Or what? Roman crossed the distance between them fast, closing his hand around Dale's wrist with considerably more force than Dale had used on Vivian's, breaking the grip before Dale fully registered the movement had started. Dale swung wide with his free hand, catching Roman across the jaw hard enough to snap his head sideways, and the diner's front door banged open at nearly the same instant as Cody came in from the lot, a tire iron already in his hand, face set on finishing whatever his father had signaled him to finish. What followed was fast and ugly, and over in considerably less time than it took either Corwin to fully understand they had already lost. Roman took a glancing hit from the tire iron across his shoulder before getting inside Cody's reach and driving him back into the counter hard enough to knock the napkin dispenser to the floor. Dale, scrambling for a knife from the kitchen block, found Vivian herself blocking the doorway, 74 years old and shaking and refusing, for the first time in 41 years, to move out of this family's way. That was the moment the first set of headlights swung into the gravel lot outside. Engines, 14 of them, in total, rolling in off Highway 26 in a tight, fast formation that had covered 15 miles in considerably less time than 15 miles usually took. Because a text that says "don't call" come tends to move men faster than almost anything else will. The gravel lot filled with headlights before the sound of the engines themselves had even finished announcing them, and for a moment the diner's front window lit up white gold with the reflection of 14 sets of chrome catching the parking lot's single working floodlight. They came through the door in the same controlled rush Roman himself had learned from riding with them for over a decade, and the fight, such as it had become, ended within seconds of their arrival. Cody dropping the tire iron the instant he understood the math had changed entirely. Dale backing against the kitchen's walk-in door with a knife he no longer had any plausible use for. The diner went silent all at once. 14 riders and one battered road captain filling a room built for maybe 30 people at capacity. And underneath that silence, Vivian Coyle sat down hard in the nearest booth, her legs finally giving out now that giving out no longer cost anyone anything. "You all right?" The rider closest to her, a woman named Reyes with gray threading her dark hair, crouched down to Vivian's level. "I don't know," Vivian whispered. "I've known for 18 months. I should have said something 18 months ago." "You said something tonight," Reyes said. "That's the part that's going to matter." The sheriff's department, 40 minutes out on a good night, arrived considerably faster once Roman's call described 14 motorcycles already on scene and a diner owner caught mid-assault by more than a dozen witnesses. What they found, once the walk-in cooler's tin of sedative and Dale's own handwritten ledger of special nights came to light, was a pattern stretching back nearly 3 years. 11 confirmed victims, most of whom had never filed a report, several of whom were tracked down over the following weeks and told, for the first time, that what had happened to them on a bad night on the highway had not been their own fault at all. One of them, a long-haul trucker who had quietly blamed himself for 2 years over a missing wallet and a night he could not account for, wept on the phone with the investigating detective for several minutes before he managed to say anything usable for her report. Dale Corwin and his son were both charged with multiple counts of assault, robbery, and administering a controlled substance without consent. Charges that would grow as investigators worked backward through 3 years of ledger entries. Vivian was never charged with anything. The county prosecutor, reviewing her statement, noted that a woman who had finally found the courage to stop a crime in progress, at genuine risk to her own safety, was not the person that particular investigation existed to punish. Off the record, the prosecutor told a colleague that of everyone whose name appeared in this case, Vivian Coyle was the only one who had spent 18 months trying to work up the nerve to end it, rather than continue profiting from it. The rusty spur closed within the month, its ownership tied up in a case that would take considerably longer than that to resolve. Vivian, 41 years into a career she had never expected to end this way, found herself, at 74, without a job for the first time since she was 33, and found, within days, considerably more support than she had ever imagined a diner full of strangers might owe her. The club did not let that gap last long. A member's sister ran a diner 2 towns over that had been looking, for months, for someone who actually knew how to cook a proper breakfast, and Vivian started there within 3 weeks, this time in a kitchen where nobody kept anything unmarked in the walk-in. Roman visits every time his route brings him anywhere near that stretch of Wyoming highway, and Vivian, without fail, sets aside the first plate of whatever she's made that morning. The way she once did for a son who never got the chance to grow old enough to need a warning, like the one she finally found the courage to write. She has started, since the new job, teaching the diner's other cooks her biscuit recipe, a small piece of old Mr. Corwin's honest kitchen she intends to keep passing along regardless of what happened to the roof it was first made under. She keeps that folded napkin still, the one she never had to hand him because he found it himself, tucked into a drawer at home beside a photograph of Danny in his dress uniform. She does not think of herself as brave. She thinks of herself as a woman who was 18 months too late for one stranger, and, by the grace of whatever, kept her hands steady that evening, exactly on time, for another. If this story reached you, if you believe it is never too late to find the courage to stop something you have watched happen for far too long, share it with someone who needs the reminder that one small act of nerve can undo years of silence. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from tonight and whether you've ever had to find courage you didn't know you had. And if you believe Vivian deserved every one of those 14 engines that showed up for her, type courage below so she knows it reached you too.